Okay, hi, and welcome to Working In with Heights, potentially the only series dedicated to exercising your brain. Now, Heights, as you might have guessed, is all about brain health and mental well-being. We make smart, sustainable supplements that combine the essential oils and nutrients your brain and body need, and we deliver them through your letterbox every single month. We also create clever content in collaboration with the world's leading experts to help you optimize your brain health and performance too, so you can reach your heights, whatever they might be. It's time to introduce today's mental fitness instructor, Dr. Tara Swart. So, hello, Tara.
Hi, Dan. Thank you for having me back. Coaching. So I worked with a lot of CEOs. I now have a handful of coaching clients. I do a few talks, but since my book came out and became a bestseller, The Source, I mostly split my time between working with Heights as the Chief Science Officer, lecturing at MIT, and doing more book-related stuff. Neuroplasticity is basically the ability of the brain to change. So we know that the brain changes throughout life. We know that, if you've watched a child grow from 0 to 2, how they go from being able to do absolutely nothing and being so vulnerable and helpless to walking, talking, having their own opinion, being able to feed themselves, starting to make friends. It's amazing when you look at what happens in the first 2 years of life. And then obviously there's a lot of formal learning from about the age of 5 to 18, but 5 to 12 there's a lot of formal learning. It's still quite simple. It's still a lot about safety and learning emotions and stuff. And then during the teenage years there's a huge amount of neural pruning. So the brain has grown massively until about the age of 13, and then it's about making it more sophisticated. So it's not just about bigger is better. It's about focusing on the pathways that are going to make successful adults out of these teenagers. And so, for example, if you haven't learned 5 languages by the time you're 13, then you don't need some pathways that were wired into your brain, so they just get pruned away. And actually, that active process of the brain being shaped and molded by everything that it experiences, formal learning, every person you meet, every emotion you experience, every memory you recall, that goes on really actively till the age of 25. We used to think that your personality was pretty much formed by the time you were 18. And then from 25 to 65, and this is the area that I find the most exciting, there's so much that you can do to keep your brain really flexible and keep it learning, keep it growing and changing. If you learn a new language, if you meet new people, if you travel, of course you're doing really good things to your brain, but neuroplasticity works for good or bad. So if you are indulging in bad habits, addictions, going over negative memories, hanging around with people who damage your self-esteem or your confidence, you're also letting neuroplasticity happen to your brain. So it needs to be thought of in that holistic way. And like I mentioned earlier, there does seem to be a window, late 30s, early 40s, where if you have really got on top of your sleep cycle, your diet, your hydration, your oxygenation of your brain, and really positive, meaningful social interactions, you're setting yourself up to age much better than if you don't do those things.
And, the story of neuroplasticity is an interesting one. We obviously used to think it's, you're born with a certain brain and stuck with it, right? And that story has changed enormously over the years. So do you want to take us through a little bit of the knowledge of the story behind neuroplasticity and its discoveries?
Yeah, so the whole, the pendulum swing between nature and nurture, basically. For a long time, it swung very much in favor of DNA is everything. Now we have this amazing sort of quite emerging field called epigenetics, which is the effect of the environment on your gene expression. So yes, we have certain genes that we inherit from our parents, but we have the ability to switch on or off the expression of some of those through our lifestyle behaviors. If you think of a shoelace, if there's little plastic bits at the end, that's how I describe a telomere, which is at the end of a DNA sequence, is that if you indulge in good lifestyle habits along the lines of what we've discussed already, you keep those neatly closed up. If you indulge in negative lifestyle habits, then they start to fray, and then you start, to get damage and degradation of your DNA. So also that you don't inherit the genes that your parents were born with, you inherit the genes that, what they've done with their lifestyle factors by the time they've conceived you. And we now know a lot of interesting stuff about transgenerational inheritance. So we know that people who were in the Holocaust or in the Dutch famine, who experienced severe stress at a certain fertile time of their life, passed on differently regulated stress responses, not just to their children, but also to their grandchildren. So it's very, very complex, but it's very exciting. So I think the first really famous story of neuroplasticity was this guy, Phineas Gage, who was a railway worker who got a tamping rod through his brain, and then his personality totally changed. But like I said, for a long time, we only knew about stuff about the brain because of things that went wrong. What we've been able to do now, for example, we're both Londoners, so the London cabbies that do the knowledge. Like when I was doing my PhD, or even for some time after that, we didn't really know if these taxi drivers had a propensity to be able to form knowledge in the part of the hippocampus where memory and navigation are connected, or if the learning actually grew and changed that part of their brain. But since we got the sophisticated scanning technologies, we definitely see that the difference between starting and completing the knowledge has physically changed the part of the brain where memory and navigation are connected. Other sort of, lovely examples of that, and, this is why I say I don't accept hard wiring as an excuse for bad behavior kind of thing, is that, we're so much more malleable than that. So for millennia in our evolution, we lived in caves, alpha males impregnated lots of women and then went off in a nomadic way and maybe came back later, maybe never came back to that cave. So in the history of humanity, for a relatively short period of time, most cultures around the world have asked people to live in unit families. Now, we've known for a long time that when a woman is, has the pregnancy hormones, has the oxytocin during childbirth and breastfeeding, that this is the hormone of bonding that underlies that amazing bond between a new mum and her baby. And we didn't think that oxytocin had an effect on fathers' brains. And as far as we know, we've only known for about 9 years now that new dads' brains, the limbic system where the emotions come from, are altered by oxytocin when they first become a dad. So the oxytocin levels go up, and that's all about feeling warm and cuddly and, wanting to protect. The hug hormone. Wanting to protect your baby rather than testosterone, which would make you want to compete. So we also know that when you become a new dad, your testosterone levels go down a bit. If the baby sleeps in the same room as both parents, the dad's testosterone levels go down even more. So that's neuroplasticity in action. It's amazing. So those are some human examples. The most impactful but controversial animal examples were in the Silver Spring laboratories in the States. They actually led to the founding of PETA because they would now be deemed too cruel to be done. But so right-handed monkeys had their right hand put in a sling for 2 weeks, so they had to use their left hand to groom and feed themselves and interact with the other monkeys. And then there was mapping done of the parts of the brain so in the brain, there's basically a map of your whole body. And the more if you're right-handed, the right hand has got larger space than the left hand. What they were able to see was how these dynamic maps shifted when animals had to use their non-dominant hand for 2 weeks. And so, for example, we know that if you grew up speaking English, Spanish, and Portuguese, and then you moved from Brazil to England and you still spoke Portuguese at home, but you didn't really speak Spanish anymore and you speak English a lot more, again, there's a dynamic map where the more that part of the brain is used, the larger that part grows, and then it overwrites the parts that wither from disuse. So I think those are my, I've got another favorite neuroplasticity story, which, because it's all to do with aging. I think I'm coming across as a bit obsessed with aging, but so there was this experiment done on people in their 80s. It was originally done and then remade by the BBC in a film called The Young Ones, but the original research is known as counterclockwise research. There were 3 groups of people in their 80s. One group just were the control group, so they lived like normal for a week. One group were asked to reminisce about being in their 60s for a week. And one group were actually taken to homes that were retrofitted to look like their homes did 20 years ago. If they didn't have the same glasses or walking frames 20 years ago, they were taken away for a week. And they had photos of their younger selves in these homes. And at the end of 1 week, the group that lived in the retrofitted homes, who'd been dropped off outside this place, and these little old ladies in their 80s were told, you've got to take your suitcase up to the bedroom. And they were literally saying, I can't carry a suitcase, I can barely get upstairs. But they were left to sort themselves out, which they of course did. At the end of 1 week, they had increased visual acuity and increased musculoskeletal coordination. The reminiscing group actually had some improvements too, but no way as much as the group that lived like that for a week. So, you know, I always say spend time with younger people, spend time with older people too, because they're so wise. This gives us a whole new angle on mind over matter. And, you know, when I turned 40, I went for my annual optician test, and he said, actually, similarly, he said, you look young, but you're not, so you're going to need reading glasses soon. And I just said, no, I'm not having that. That's definitely going to make me like feel and look old. And so the following year, I was having the test done, and he's literally whipped around in the middle of the test and said, what have you done? And I said, why, is it still the same? And he went, it's better. And I'm not going to say how many years on I am from that test, but it's quite a few now, and I still don't have reading glasses.
Are there correlations between, let's say, lifelong learners and longevity and overall mental fitness as we age then?
Mm-hmm. So we do know that your intelligence level, and I'm not a big fan of IQ, but, you know, however you rate your intelligence, and that can be just being savvy, it can be being flexible, and your educational level, your formal educational level, does push back the threshold for showing up dementia symptoms by up to 5 years. So we do know that learning has a very, very significant impact on brain health and mental fitness, as you put it. Other forms of learning throughout life, they have to be attention intense enough to create this similar effect. So unfortunately, crosswords and Sudoku, they're not attention intense enough, unless you're like really not a numbers person and you start up Sudoku. But learning a new language or learning a musical instrument are the classic examples of things that are attention intense enough to physically change your brain. You know, for some people, it might be cooking, it might be coding. It's just pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and having to make such an effort that it actually builds up new neural pathways in your brain.
Yeah, and going beyond that story that you tell yourself whether you can or you can't do something, which ultimately, you know, to quote Dr. Arman, who very poignantly says, if you fight for your limitations, you get to keep them.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Which is, you know, and therefore, you know, I'm not a guitar player or violin player. I mean, you can become any of those things. It's just going to be challenging. And that's the whole point and benefit of it as well.
Actually, enjoyment is part of it too. So, you know, I might not become like a recognized artist or be any good, but if I enjoy painting or sketching, then I should do it. And we know that with exercise, if you do exercise that you enjoy rather than dragging yourself to the gym at the end of the day, you actually get more release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor.
So with neuroplasticity, is it kind of a case of use it or lose it?
Yeah, absolutely. So like I said, it's a very active process till we're about 25. Then it's stable. So it's more a case of, at best, you'll plateau. And, you know, I think a lot of people in our community are people that want to grow in, like, you know, in many different ways, keep growing. So you're not going to lose it if you just do your day job and see the same people over and over again, but you're not going to build it up. Let's put it that way.
What are your top tips or tricks for people that are listening to grow their neural networks? Or in fact, you know, what are the 3 tips that you have for us to take away? Okay,
so just as a general overview, I'd like to say, you know, be amazed by how much potential your brain has. It's way more than we ever thought. Be prepared to do the hard work, but understand that the benefit that you will get is greater than just the thing that you choose to learn, for example. But the 3 sort of mechanisms for inducing neuroplasticity are aerobic exercise. And I know you put up one of my favorite quotes on Instagram the other day, which is, if you regularly do aerobic exercise, you've got a 12 to 13% turnover rate of, you know, neurogenesis, which is new cells turning into neurons. embryonic cells turning into neurons. If you've been a couch potato and then you start exercising, that goes up to 30%. So that's definitely my excuse for like with my on-off exercise schedule. Novelty is another thing that induces neuroplasticity. So exposing yourself to new things. In a very primitive way, this can feel threatening for the brain, but actually it's a way to get that intensity that you require. And then emotional intensity also has a very big effect on the brain. So there I'd probably give a word of warning, which is that if you experience, a lot of stress or you have a negative interaction, that, that can become like a loop in your brain. So it's either about protecting yourself from that or like inducing really positive emotions to help you on your learning journey.